Shabbat Shalom. You may be seated. Giving all praise, worship, respect, loyalty to the Most High God. Thanking Him for my life. Thanking Him for my life of my family and the life of all of you here. So today's portion, Lecha, is Genesis, starting in the 12th chapter, and it goes to the 17th chapter. I'll be doing chapters 12 through 13, and Abba will continue doing chapters 14 through 17. So, as we're seeing as we're going through the book of Genesis, we recognize that it's starting to hone down on the lineage. So we started with Adam. Last week we got into Noah and his children, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And as by the end of the 11th chapter, we were already talking about really the lineage of Shem. And these people have become increasingly important because these are the people we come from. We're becoming more familiar with these names because these are our ancient forefathers that are being listed. And so now that we are at this point, we can recognize that Abraham will be the progenitor of a lot of nations, but the focus of this book is the children of Yisrael, which are his descendants. So as we're learning, God chose Abraham not because he was powerful, but because he had a lot of great attributes. God chose Abraham for his goodness. And as it was said in the Haftarah portion, we were chosen because of the covenant that God made with Abraham, and not because of our strength or our might, but because he loves us and he loves Abraham, and the Most High God's word never comes back void. So we understand that because he made this covenant with Avron, that he was going to keep it and we were going to continue to be his people. So as we go on in our lives, and as we go on trying to reach out to people and show the word of God and make sure that they understand the word of God, it's important to harp not on the idea of being better or stronger or more powerful than other people. It's important to harp on that missing part in people's lives, which is God. Abraham was a good person by any standards, not because he knew God before, but he had a good moral compass. And so the Most High God chose him. So as we go about teaching people, we need to make sure that they understand that the missing part in their life is not feeling more powerful than people. It's making sure that they understand that the missing part is God and the importance that God is going to bring to their life. And the understanding of Torah is going to make them a better person and being able to have better interactions with one another.
We're in the book of Genesis, the 12th chapter, starting in the first verse. Hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Now Yehovah said unto Avron, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto the land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and be thou a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and him that curseth thee will I curse. And in thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed.
So, I take this class, and one of the things that we watched was a TED Talk by this woman named Isabel Wilkerson. And she talked about the Great Migration. So it was during 1916-17 to the 1970s that you saw black people were leaving the South, trying to escape the Jim Crow laws and the segregation and the oppression, coming north and west, trying to seek out different opportunities for themselves. And one thing that she started is called, she said it was a decision to leave all that they had known and all of the people that they had loved, and to set out for a place far, far away that they had never seen, in hopes that their lives might be better. With Abraham having God tell him directly, there was no doubt that his life was going to get better because God promised it to him. He told him his life was going to improve. He was going to be the father of so many nations. So it became, at that point, Abraham had that sense of relief, knowing that, okay, because I have God on my side and I have God directing me, I may not know where I'm going, but I know how it's going to end up. Kind of like if you see if there's a movie and you know what happens in the beginning and you know what happens in the end, you don't know what happens in the middle, but you know at the end it's going to end up good. And the Most High God says this, he's going to bless those that bless him and curse those that curse him. Just because you're a good person, people don't always like you, but you need to understand that God has you. God recognizes that there are going to be people who treat you wrong, even if it's undeserved, but he understands that, okay, I have this confidence because nobody who comes trying to discount what I do or trying to attack, whether verbally or physically, they're not going to prevail because the Most High God already promised that to me.
Right.
And he promised it to all of us, and that's what we're going to be, that's what we need to rely on, that even and no matter what we do, of course, there are going to be people who hate it, but we got to stay steadfast in what we do, because otherwise the Most High God is not going to really fulfill his end of the covenant, because we're not doing what we need to be doing. Don't you?
So Avram went as Yahweh had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Avram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. And Avram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their substance that they had gathered, and the souls that they had gotten in Haran. And they went forth to go into the land of Canaan, and into the land of Canaan they came. And Avram passed through the land unto the place of Shechem, unto the terebinth of Moreh, and the Canaanite was then in the land. And Yahweh appeared unto Avram and said, Unto thy seed will I give this land. And he builded there an altar unto Yahweh who appeared unto him. And he removed from thence unto the mountain on the east of Beit El, and pitched in his tent, having Beit El on the west, and Ai on the east. And he builded there an altar unto Yahweh, and called upon the name of Yahweh. And Avram journeyed, going on still toward the south.
So Abraham didn't ask questions. He knew that God had a direction for him, and he just went on his way. He took his wife, he took his nephew, and all the things that they had, and they went on. And this is obviously pre-Torah, but Abraham knew,
Right.
well, at this point, Avram, he knew that in order to show his gratitude for what all the Most High was doing for him, he built an altar. He didn't know how things were going to come about. He knew, as we read in chapter 11, Sarah was barren. They didn't have any children at this point, but God said that your seed will populate this land. And so the Most High, Abraham just went with that. He knew at some point children were going to come into the midst, and he was going to be able to, they were going to be able to have all the land that Abraham was sent on. And so as we see, he's going to travel through a lot of different lands, and all those lands, as if when we go on, and even specifically in the book of Joshua, you'll see where people ended up and how we came to acquire these lands, and how the lands were distributed among the 12 tribes.
And there was a famine in the land, and Avram went down into Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was sore in the land. And it came to pass, when he was come near to enter into Egypt, that he said unto Sarai his wife, Behold, now I know that thou art a fair woman to look upon. And it will come to pass, when the Egyptians shall see thee, that they will say, This is his wife, and they will kill me, but thee they will keep alive.
So Abraham understood that what the beauty that he saw in Sarah, other people could see it too.
That's a fact.
Just because, you want to believe like, oh, this is my spouse, this is my girlfriend or my boyfriend. I know they look good. Other people can also see that they look good. So going to the idea of the moral compass, the Egyptians, they weren't going to commit adultery.
Right.
But they'll kill you.
Right.
So it's like, they're a little confused on like the whole idea of morality, but they got the spirits because they were like, okay, this is what we're not going to do, but we can excuse other things because we're going to make sure we're not, impeding on, we're not going to impede on, your relationship.
Right.
But if you out the way, we could be good. But he made sure you see the way he asked Sarah. He asked her very kindly because he probably was thinking, oh, if I did this last week or I did this yesterday, she might not be too willing to say that I'm her brother. Right. Because if she said that it's like, I'm thinking about you did this, this, and this. This is my husband. This is my husband. And then it's over for Abraham. So so he made sure, let her know, like, because I know how these people move,
right,
this is how we have to act. And going into any spaces, especially knowing as Israelites, and we have knowledge of self, you have to understand how the people around you operate. Because if you are completely in the dark about things, you're going to end up in compromising situations. Because as in the lands of our captivities, our captors and the other people who are in these lands, a lot of them are very unsavory characters. And so if you don't understand how certain people and cultures move, and you go there without that knowledge, you're going to end up being surprised. And so he was making sure, like, okay, because I know this, we're going to do this, and I know that God is going to make it work out at some point, because I'm not supposed to be dying in Egypt if I'm supposed to, be the father of a bunch of nations.
Verse 13. Say, I pray thee that I am my sister, that it may be well with me for thy sake, and that my soul may live because of thee. And it came to pass that when Avram was coming to Egypt, the Egyptians beheld the woman, that she was very fair. And the princes of Pharaoh saw her and praised her to Pharaoh. And the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. He dealt well with Avron for her sake. And he had sheep and oxen and he-asses and men servants and maid servants and she-asses and camels. And Yahweh plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Avram's wife.
So you see, of course, this is before, like, you see that a lot of the things that we see in Torah were cultural practice that you may see across many nations. So we know the idea of the dowry where it's paid to the family of of the woman you want to marry, and you give them that. We see that Pharaoh was laying it on really thick. He was making sure, like, okay, you're her brother, so you could have this, you could have this, you could have this, you could have this, making sure that he looks good to Abraham in hopes that he could marry Sarah, not knowing that this was her husband. And so because God is always in the midst, Pharaoh's house was plagued. And it obviously doesn't say, but we know that Pharaoh knew that this is what the reason was.
And Pharaoh called Avram and said, "What is this that thou hast done unto me? Why didst thou not tell me that she was thy wife? What sayest thou, she is my sister? So that I took her to be my wife. Now therefore, behold thy wife, take her, and go thy way." And Pharaoh gave men charge concerning him, and they brought him on the way, and his wife, and all that he had.
So you know Pharaoh was crying, he was shaking, he was sliding down the wall crying, he was shadow boxing, punching air, thinking he's like, oh, I'm about to have this beautiful woman. And you know, we could, just based on like, we see that not only is Abraham someone, the behaviors of Abraham, ones we should aspire to, but we also say, look to the rock in which you were hewn, and it's Abraham and Sarah. So obviously Sarah carried herself in a good way, and so she, of course, was favorable not only physically, but you know, the way that she behaved, it was favorable to other people. So Pharaoh obviously didn't want him in their house. He didn't want them in the land. He didn't want them in the house because, like, I can't marry her. My life has gotten worse since she's been in this house. So y'all just gotta pick up and go.
Right.
And we are like Lecha, you know, go you forth, go y'all forth. Y'all cattle, y'all nephew, everybody,
Everything.
pick up and go. So he made sure, like, okay, but of course we gotta see again that God is in the midst. He made sure that nothing happened. Abraham was able to benefit from Sarah being there, but at the end of the day, that was still his wife, and God was not going to let, you know, some action where like Pharaoh tries to marry her or anything else happen. And that's again relying on his faith, because Abraham didn't know how that was going to go. Right. But he had to trust that God was going to make it turn out in a positive way.
Right.
Chapter 13. And Avram went out of Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the south. And Avram was very rich in cattle, in silver, and in gold. And he went on his journeys from the south, even to Beit El, unto the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Beit El and Ai, unto the place of the altar which he had made there at the first. And Avram called there on the name of Yahweh.
So, can you go to Joshua chapter 8? Start in verse, just right in the beginning.
1?
Yeah.
We're in Joshua chapter 8, verse 1. And Yahweh said unto Joshua, Fear not, neither be thou dismayed. Take all the people of war with thee, and rise up and go up to Ai. See, I have given into thy hand the king of Ai, and his people, and his city, and his land. And thou shalt do to Ai and her king as thou didst unto Jericho and her king. Only the spoil thereof and the cattle thereof shall ye take for a prey unto yourselves. Set thee an ambush for the city behind it. So Joshua arose, and all the people of war to go up to Ai. And Joshua chose out 30,000 men, the mighty men of valor, and sent them forth by night. And he commanded them, saying, Behold, ye shall lie in an ambush against the city, behind the city. Go not very far from the city, but be ye all ready.
Amen. So as we see, of course, the lands that Abraham is walking to, that God is guiding him, these are not inhabited lands. People live there. So we see like where he's saying that he had his tent between Beit El and Ai. A lot of these places, which is where the 7 nations that we were supposed to destroy, but obviously when you read through Joshua, that's not what happened. But these are nations that there were plans for us to end up living in. And that's what the promise that God had given him. I unfortunately was not one of those places that we were going to inhabit. The Most High God said, kill everyone, kill their king. You can keep the all types of the spoils, and you can keep the cattle for yourselves. But at the end of the day, everything has to go. And so as we see, we can begin to make those connections between books, because right now we see where Abraham spent time in this land, and we see later what happens with those lands.
Back in the other portion.
Yeah.
Genesis chapter 13, verse 5. And Lot also, who went with Avron, had flocks and herds and tents, and the land was not able to bear them, that they might dwell together, for their substance was great, so that they could not dwell together. And there was a strife between the herdmen of Abram's cattle and the herdmen of Lot's cattle. And the Canaanite and the Perizzite dwelt then in the land.
So we see that in the beginning of chapter 12, it says, get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house. Of course, I think oftentimes we try to hold on to things that are familiar, and sometimes we hold on for too long because those things are not meant for our path. As we go along in life, there are things don't always have to end up in strife. You don't have to break bonds because you had an argument. Sometimes people grow apart, and that's what happened with Abraham and Lot. And it's not really even directly between them. It's between their herdsmen. But because the Most High said, get thee from thy kindred, Lot, of course, is going to be one of those people who he's going to have to leave behind because he's not a part of God's plan that he set out for Abraham and for Sarah. So we got to make sure that as we try to get closer to the Most High God, that we don't hold on too tight and for too long to the point where we're hurt by having certain people in our midst, because they're not meant for the same path that we're meant to go down. So as we do that, we need to make sure that we got to pray that the Most High God reveals to us when people are not supposed to be around us anymore. And we need to take that first step. Make sure that we don't say, well, nothing bad has happened yet, so, I could keep them around. Sometimes splits can be amicable. And we need to make sure that we hope that the splits that we have in our friendships, relationships, even if you have a dispute with your family, you want to make sure that it's amicable, because you don't want that on your conscience as you're trying to pursue God in the way that you're meant to.
And Avram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen. For we are brethren. Is not the whole land before thee? Separate thyself, I pray thee, from me. If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou take the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes, and behold, all the plain of the Jordan, that it was held well watered everywhere. Before Yahweh destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, like the garden of Yahweh, like the land of Egypt, as thou goest unto Zoar. So Lot chose him all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed east, and they separated themselves the one from the other.
So we see that Abraham knew he was going to be blessed regardless of where he went. So he gave Lot first choice. And Lot saw all the beauty and the splendor of the land. He saw that, I have all these cattle. I can plant. I could be able to do all these things. Make sure that all the people and the things that I'm responsible for, they'll be accounted for, and they'll be able to have more than enough. And so he chose that way. Unfortunately, as we'll learn, Sodom and Gomorrah is another one of those places where you didn't really want to be. And that's why it's also important to know where you're going, because I believe it's in the next portion you're going to figure out why it was an undesirable place to be.
Avram dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners against Yahweh exceedingly. And Yahweh said unto Avram, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land which thou seest to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. And I will make thy seed as the dust of the earth, so that if a man can number the dust of the earth, then shall thy seed also be numbered. Arise, walk through the land in the length of it, and in the breadth of it, for unto thee will I give it.
So the Most High God, once Lot was out of the picture, but he'll end up coming back. But once Lot was no longer in the midst of Abraham and they were no longer dwelling together, God spoke to Abraham again. He's like, okay, so you didn't choose, you let Lot choose his part, but understand that everything that you can see, that's all going to be the land of your descendants. And again, he doesn't know, Abraham does not know where his descendants will come about. He doesn't know when it's going to happen, but he has to trust in God and know that at some point he's going to have children, and his children are going to have children. And there's going to be an innumerable amount of people, as much as the dust of the land. And we all know, like, if you look at different types of dirt, dirt you see outside, the sand of the beach, we can't count that amount.
At all.
But we see that that's the number of people who are going to be around. And so we may live in the United States, and we understand that they say the population of this black population is 13%. We know some people don't do the census. We know different things happen. But if you just add together the people in the United States, people in the Caribbean, people in South America, people in Europe, our people who are spread out in Africa, we are all in the four corners of the earth. So the number of our people,
Right.
whether we recognize they look like us or not, we know that we are a large group of people. Most of the people in the world are not white. Most of the people are brown people because they live in areas where it's sunny, and so they need to accommodate in that way. But the Most High God, when it's time, he's going to reveal all the people who he has chosen. And even if it's not as large amount as the people who have been spread about and who are born in these lands of our captivities, it's going to still be a lot of people, and we're all going to be able to reap these benefits and return to these lands in which Abraham is going to travel.
And Avron moved his tent and came and dwelt by the turnpits of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built there an altar unto Jehovah.
So we see that again, Abraham was grateful. He was grateful for the blessing that he was going to receive from the Most High. And so he was able to settle, and he was able to build an altar to show his gratitude to the Most High, because he knows that there's so many people on the earth. We see, although we, at this point, we've been looking at the descendants from Shem. And even then, that's not all his descendants, because he had children after Arpachshad. He has his brothers and his brothers' children and their children. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of people on the earth. Right. So Abraham, or Avram, at this point is just very grateful that he's been chosen by the Most High God to fulfill a certain duty. And so, in addition to that, I know, like, I do my own. I've been trying to read more on my own, and I've been looking at, just reading through. And once you start looking at the people in Tanakh as actual people and not as characters in a book, or not even people to be particularly idolized, you can better your relationship with other people, because you realize, I can see myself in this person. I can aspire to be this type of person. I know sometimes, you don't want to associate yourself with the bad. Like, you don't want to be like the Korahs of your generation. You don't want to be, like, there's so many different people who have done wrong, and you don't want to associate yourself with that. But you have to recognize, like, okay, I know I have these flaws, I have these deficits, but I can also aspire to the merits that I see in Abraham, because he was a person, and he was a person without even the Torah. So now that I have the Torah, and I'm building on the Torah, and that's just the foundation for my goodness and what righteousness I can aspire to, that is then something that I can now try to be. And so now, thanking the Most High God for the opportunity to speak today. Always grateful for these opportunities. Giving thanks to him for life, my family, and the lives of all you here. I'll now be calling up Samal, Zaccar, BINAH. Amen.
First and foremost, just offering all honors, praises, respect, acknowledgement, and thanks to the great King of the universe, to the God of our fathers, to the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, and the God of Yaakov. Thanking him for all things and thanking him for everything. I bid you in the tongue of our forefathers, Shabbat Shalom, Lecha.
Shabbat Shalom, Lecha.
Please be seated. Thanking the Most High God for life. Thanking him for strength. Thanking him for food, clothing, and shelter. Thanking the Most High God because he is good and his mercy endures forever. Thanking the Most High God for my teacher, Hamore Mishael ben Yisrael. Thanking the Most High God for the lives of my family. Thanking him for the lives of your family. Hoping and praying that he'll continue to be with us, bless us, strengthen us, and keep us. Thanking the Most High God for the life of the Maftira. If you wouldn't mind to give her another round of applause. Did I just say Maftira and y'all clapped? Yo, and y'all clapped? Listen. My apology. Thanking the Most High God for the life of the young lady who did a part of the portion this morning. If y'all would mind, give her a round of applause, please. So, they, in in order for us, one of the things that's important for us as we're growing and we're moving forward is that we need to train, we need to prepare our younger people and the people who are going to be coming up next behind us. And the only way for us to be able to effectively do that is to be able to put them in a position to be able to do it. You see, people learn how to drive a car by getting behind the wheel and operating the car.
Right.
And so that's part of what we're looking to do. So I understand that some people may not agree with women doing portions and all of those different things. So I'm aware of that. I didn't really ask your opinion. Because one of the things that I am realizing is that, and I'm realizing it more and more, we have so much, so many post-traumatic issues because of slavery and the things that we were subject to that we don't even realize how far it goes sometimes. And so we perpetuate thoughts that we believe are our own thoughts. And we enact things that we believe are of our own volition, and they're actually not. They're actually things that we adopted and picked up because of being here. And that whole male-female relationship and how we handle those things, that's one of the major things that we picked up from being here. Is it on the screen? Is mine? So before I continue with the portion, I just want to touch on a couple of things. Because this portion right now is actually very important for these days and times. Because if you actually read about, and you'll see part of it, you see she read and it said that in 13:13 it said, now the men of Sodom were wicked and sinners against Yahweh exceedingly. This is after the flood, right? So the Most High God destroyed the earth because of certain violence and certain types of behavior. And after the Most High God destroyed the earth, just how many other generations down, but 10 generations down, you see you're talking about violence and war and all of those things again. And so the world at the time that Abraham or Avron at this point came about, the world needed Avron at that time. Just like the world right now needs Avram again. And so I'm going to talk about certain things. We're going to go through certain things. But before I get into that, just understand what's happening right now. And I speak about these things because I think it's important for us to really and truly understand what's happening. And I'm not speaking to them from a way of trying to minimize anything else, but I want us to consider certain things. So this mandate, right? This mandate that came about. For us in the United States, the mandate represents an assault on your First Amendment rights. I just want y'all to understand that that's what it is. Because if it was the government controlling whether or not you have religious freedoms, that would be one thing, because you have certain recourse when it comes to the government dictating your religious freedoms. But when they give the autonomy for private businesses to do it, then it becomes something different. And what's happening right now is private businesses now have the right to all of your religious freedoms that we thought we had, now all of those are slowly going away. Right. And this is just the beginning. So I just want us to consider that that's what's happening, and this is just the beginning. And so just looking at Kyrie Irving for a minute, and this is, I don't have an issue with government or what the government is doing or what private businesses are doing, because they're doing exactly what the Most High God had them to do. That's what he prescribed for them to do.
Right.
The Most High God said, and I made the wicked for the day of evil.
Right.
So that's what he prescribed for them to do, so I'm not worried about that.
At all.
My concern is when you have people who are starting and looking to try to stand up, and you have people that don't support them.
Right.
Because the fact of the matter is this: if you think about Kyrie Irving for a minute, if the Nets went from, okay, you can play half the games, to now you can't play any games. That was a decision that the Nets made. Now, Kyrie, for anybody, you've been on a team, you've been with a best friend, teammates are supposed to support teammates regardless to what.
Right.
So guess what? If the Nets team said, if Kyrie don't play, we don't play, guess what? The Nets will change.
Right.
But the team isn't doing that. So now, even though the team believes that they're supporting Kyrie just by standing around and not knocking him, you're not supporting him because you're not taking an active role in making sure people understand that we stand with him. And that's the issue here. That's what's happening. And the reason that I call it out is because that's what's happening with us as well. When we don't take an active role in supporting each other and showing each other that we support them and standing up arm in arm together, the pseudo stances that we take won't matter, because there's strength in numbers, and right now we're not showing any. Right now we're not showing any. I want us to consider this whole mandate thing and how this mandate happened. And I'm choosing my words carefully. I'm not saying that this issue isn't an issue, because it's an issue. The pandemic, the coronavirus, it's an issue. But guess what? Gun violence is an issue too, am I right or wrong? And if you can go and you can make a mandate for people to take shots, then why can't you take a mandate for people to stop for gun control? Because that's something that people have been talking about for years. And that's not, if you think about it, it's not being talked about at all. It's not being talked about at all. And our young people are still dying. And our young people are getting shot, and we're killing each other. And they had a school shooting the other day, and all of these different things happening. Did you see the video with the 13-year-old boy in the Bronx? Right? 13-year-old boy walking back and forth with his tight pants on. 13. If you can, because the issue with gun control has always been caught up in Congress between Democrats and Republicans. Always. And that's been the hiccup, that they said we can't do anything about it. But yet, they didn't send this mandate issue through Congress. The mandate issue was done just like that from executive order, from the president and from certain mayors and from certain governors, which lets me know that gun control can be dealt with the same way. And if it's not, then that gives me the impression that maybe you don't want to, because maybe that's not as important. That's not as much of an important agenda item as everything else. So I just want to point all of these things out because I want us to consider where we are. And I want us to consider the things that are happening, because I want us to understand that we need to do more. We need to come together. We need to be stronger for each other. So the presentation that we're going to go into is mostly just a geographical presentation to discuss chapters 14 and 15, just to speak the geography of certain things. So that's really what we're going to touch on. But I want to go back to Abraham for a minute. Right? If you could go to the next slide. So there's this term. And I'll explain it. I'm going to talk about the term, and I'm going to explain why I'm bringing up the term now. There's this term called cognitive dissonance. And what cognitive dissonance is used to describe the mental discomfort. And I'm going to read it because it's a very technical term, and I just don't want to freelance it. is used to describe the mental discomfort that results from holding two conflicting beliefs, values, or attitudes. People tend to seek consistency in their attitudes and their perceptions, so this conflict causes feelings of unease or discomfort. The inconsistency between what people believe and how they behave motivates people to engage in actions that will help minimize feelings of discomfort. People attempt to relieve this tension in different ways, such as by rejecting, explaining away, or avoiding new information. And then you have this quote where it says, sometimes, this is just really to kind of give another dynamic to help understand cognitive dissonance. Sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. Think about you. Think about us. Think about the things that you hold strong and you believe in, because this is all going to come into play. Sometimes people hold a core belief that is very strong. When they are presented with evidence that works against that belief, the new evidence cannot be accepted. Right. It would create a feeling that is extremely uncomfortable called cognitive dissonance. And because it is so important to protect the core belief, because it's so important for the individual to protect their mindset for their own peace and their own frame of mind, they will rationalize, ignore, and even deny anything that doesn't fit in with the core belief. Why are we talking about this as it relates to Abraham? Because Abraham was in an environment where all types of things were happening. Abraham was in an environment where there was idolatry, there was violence, there was raping, there was murder. Obviously, you see the first chapter that he goes into a country with his wife, and he knows, he's aware of the savagery that these people practice in the country. God said to Abraham, Lech, Lecha, and he actually said it to him twice, here and in the next portion as well. He said, Lech, Lecha, go away from everything that you know, right, and go to a land that I'm going to tell you, and do the things that I tell you to do. For us now, you're going to hear information. You're going to be exposed to certain things. People are going to talk to you about certain things that's going to do what? It's going to conflict with what you've been taught your entire life. Cognitive dissonance. And your ability to find your way back to God, just like Abraham's ability to be able to find favor with God, your ability to find your way back to God is going to be able to overcome the conflict that only you have within yourself. That's what you're going to see. That's what you're going to be exposed to. That's what Abraham was exposed to. And if you could go to the next slide, and this is why Abraham was so important. And so when you read Isaiah 5:1, and it said, hearken unto me, ye that follow after righteousness, ye that seek the Lord. Look unto the rock from whence you were hewn, and to the hole of the pit from whence you were digged. Look unto Abraham your father, and to Sarah that bore you, for when he was but one, I called him out of the midst of all types of unsavory everything. And I blessed him, and I made him many. So as you go through this portion, and you go through the portion this afternoon, and as you go through wherever you are, and you're listening to people bringing you new information about different things, and you're going to be in conflict. And listen, it's okay to be in conflict. It's natural. It's something new. And the interesting thing about it is you might be in conflict with one thing, and the person that's sitting right next to you might be in conflict about something else. It's okay. It's okay. Because we were all brought up different. We're all brought up different. The goal, however, is to be able to overcome all of the stuff that you've been taught in order to be better. The problem sometimes remains is that a lot of times we don't realize some of the things that we were taught were bad. And so because we don't realize that it was bad, we continue on because we don't realize that it was bad. Until you put it up with new information that the Most High God brings about, and now you're in conflict. Just remember the term, cognitive dissonance. It's okay to be mentally conflicted. That's why we need to understand Torah so that we can go and we can follow and do Torah. So that should ease that conflict. Because actually, it may not even ease the conflict, but at least it will let you know what's right.
Right.
And that's what makes the difference. So we're going to pick it up in verse, we're going to pick it up in chapter 14 and starting in the first verse.
Hallelujah.
Can you go to the next slide, please?
And it came to pass in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elazar, Kedar Laomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, that they made war with Bera, king of Saram, and with Beershah, king of Gomorrah, Shinar, king of Admah, and Shemebir, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same is Zoar.
All right, so I'm just going to stop right there, and then I'm going to have him read out a good portion of it. Can you go to the next slide, please, online? So, Amraphel, king of Shinar. Amraphel is often associated with Hammurabi. So everybody's heard of the Code of Hammurabi.
Okay.
Amraphel is typically associated with Hammurabi. Shinar is typically associated with Sumer. And now more and more researchers. So you heard about the Sumerians? Shinar. Sumerians, Shinar, same place, same location. Arioch, king of Elasar, is actually Lhasa. So if you actually look at the map, you'll see Shinar, you'll see Lhasa, and you'll also see Babylon. It's all in the same area. Kedar Laomer, king of Elam, which is a little bit further east, which you can also see on the map, and Tidal, king of Goyim, and in Hebrew it says Melech Goyim. And so what it probably is probably talking about all of those smaller city-states that were around in the area. So now when you research ancient history at that time, empires were not huge. Like the Assyrian Empire was one of the first empires that really started to be huge. When you had kings and kingdoms and so on and so forth, during those times, they were actually king over a particular province, over a particular area. And so you see all of these locations that you see on the map, all of those were just different little kingdoms that kind of banded together that went to protect themselves. And we're going to get into that a little bit later on. And it's the same thing with Sodom and Gomorrah and Birch. They were just a little bit further west. Come on.
All these came as allies unto the Vale of Siddim. The same is the Salt Sea. 12 years they served Kedar Laomer, and in the 13th year they rebelled. And in the 14th year came Kedar Laomer and the kings that were with him, and smote the Rephaim and Astarot Karnaim, and the Zutim and Ham, and the Emim and Shaveh Kiratayim, and the Horites in their Mount Seir, unto El Paran, which is by the wilderness. And they turned and they turned back, and came to Ain Mishpah, the same is Kadesh, and smote all the country of the Amalekites, and also all the Amorites that dwelt in Chazon Tamar. And there went out the king of Sodom, and the king of Gomorrah, and the king of Admah, and the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, the same is Zoar. And they set the battle in array against them in the Vale of Siddim, against Kedar Laomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, and Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elazar, 4 king against the 5. Now the Vale of Siddim was full of slime pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. And they fell there, and they that remained fled to the mountain. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah, and all their victuals, and went their way. And they took Lot, Avram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed.
So what you're going to see from the slide that we have on the screen, from the map that we have on the screen, is so what it is it's enlarged, and you actually, excuse me, this slide. Can you go to the next one? And I'll just jump back in a minute. So if you see the path of the red line, this is actually the path that they took. And they were taking kingdoms all along the way. So they went right below the Arabian desert, right across. What that is that's the Sinai Peninsula. So they went right across into the land of Edom. And once they got into the land of Edom, then they started the Amalekites and the Horites, and they're talking about names like Edom. Edom didn't exist yet. So what this is this is actually an anachronism where they place a familiar name for something that came later in a land that was previously where they replace it with that. So this is the path that they took, and then they came back around, and then they went up. Come on.
And there came one that had escaped, and told Avram the Hebrew now that he dwelt by the terebinths of Mamre the Amorite, brother of Eshcol, the brother of Anir, and they were confederate with Avram. And when Avram heard that his brother was taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318, and pursued as far as Dan.
Okay, so hold on right there. So I want to touch on a couple of things here. First thing, if you could just scroll back. Yeah, there you go. I just want to show you in relation. So now they don't have Dan on the map at this time because Dan is, the name Dan came later. But if you see that river, where you see where it says Jordan River, and you go towards the top, there's Mount Hermon, where you read about it in the Tanakh. You have Mount Hermon, and the water that comes down from Mount Hermon actually flows down into the first river, into the Kinneret Sea, which is what they call the Sea of Galilee, and then that actually flows into the Jordan. So right at the top of where you see that river is, that is actually where, that's the northern portion of where the Danites had their land. So when it said that they pursued them as far as Dan, when you see they went all the way up to where Dan is, because that's where they pursued him. I want to jump back to chapter 13 for a minute, because she talked about it. She said that Abraham and Lot were able to split amicably. And so now, when Abraham heard that Lot was in trouble, it was very easy for Abraham to gather his forces together and get those people who were confederate with him and go out and get his nephew back. Why? Because there was no beef. They didn't split all upset. They didn't split all angry. And so one of the things that I just want to touch on as it relates to separation, sometimes separation is necessary. A lot of times, and she took all my words just like she took my outfit this morning. Sometimes what happens is, and I truly believe that separation is necessary. Separation was necessary for Abraham and Lot because Abraham and Lot was not on the same path.
Right.
And God wanted Lot separate from Abraham because Lot wasn't a part of the plan that he had for Abraham. When it comes to us being Israelites, I do not agree that separation is a necessary evil. I agree where separation is necessary when you have wickedness that's happening. At no point are we supposed to dwell with wickedness. So if there's wicked and there's nasty, then yeah, at that point, separation is necessary. Other than that, we as a people need to learn to figure it out. Because what happens is we so often are so quick to separate because we don't value each other really like we should. Because if you saw the value in the other person, then you would see, I need to figure out a way to make this work because this person is important. I was talking to a coworker of mine a while ago, and I remember he said something to me that I thought was important. I thought it was very prudent. He said, if you notice, it's easy for rich people to get divorced because they don't need each other financially. So you just get divorced because they can afford it. Just get divorced and you move on, and I got to pay this and I got to pay this. Versus with poor people don't tend to get divorced. The difference to that was he was speaking from a European perspective. Poor Europeans don't tend to get divorced because they need each other financially. Poor us get divorced all the time. Because even though we know we need each other, our pride overweighs our need. And so we get distracted and we become conflicted and we start to say things like, My children don't need their father or their mother. I can do it on my own. No, you can't. You can't, because that's not how God intended for us to be. God said, even though God gave parameters for divorce, he also said, I hate putting away. And so a lot of times when we want to get divorced because we angry because he stayed out too late or because she burnt the rice and we upset and we get divorced, now, guess what? Children suffer. And the reason that children suffer is because when we angry and we separate because we're angry, nothing else matters. Even the things that are important and supposed to matter the most. And so I know it's two conflicting concepts, but I'm touching on, if you would go to the next slide, I'm touching on this separation with Abraham and Lot, because even though Abraham and Lot were able to separate, they were able to, it was still his nephew.
Right.
And when his nephew needed help, he was still there because it was still his nephew. And that's one of the things that we need to learn. That even if we feel the need to separate, guess what? We need to separate in a manner that still allows us to be there for each other. Because the world right now is against us.
Right.
And if we're against ourselves, where does that leave you? Where does that leave us? You know, and I wanted to mention this earlier as it relates to the Kyrie situation. You know, the Kyrie situation and how that's being handled is similar to how slavery was handled, how we were handled back in slavery days. Because what happened was, and I understand that I'm going to get a little graphic, but just stay with me. Because guess what? In the middle of the night, when the slave master came to slave quarters, and they kicked open the slave door at your neighbor's house, and you heard kicking, and you heard screaming, and you heard whatever it is that you heard from that next door, you ain't say nothing. Say nothing. And because you didn't say anything, that allowed him to be able to do whatever it is that he was going to do. And we didn't take a stand, not understanding that, guess what? I know it's not me now, but you might be next. You might be next. Next time it might be your daughter. Next time it might be your son. Next time it might be your daughter, your wife. And we didn't consider that. Because we were too busy thinking about us. And that's what selfishness brings about.
Teacher.
That's what selfishness brings about. Too busy thinking about us. So I'm going to just say this right quick and then I'm going to go on. So I'm trying to get through this as quickly as possible because I know it's right around 2. So I'm going to just say that's the reason that certain timing and certain things are important, because you got to be considerate for the next people that's coming after you. So I'm rushing a bit and I'm trying to get through everything that I need to get through. But so with that being said, in the slide that's on the screen, which shows the Median Empire and it shows that path, what you see on the left-hand side, which I should have touched on before, was the first picture on the bottom left that's actually Mount Hermon. And so if you notice, so this was taken in April, where it was warm. But if you notice at the top of the mountain, you still see snow. Because what happens is it's still colder at the higher elevation, and that's how you constantly get that flow of water, because that snow gradually starts to melt, and it continues to feed the rivers in which it leads into. The picture next to it is actually a picture of Tel Dan, or the city of Dan, at that northern portion right before Mount Hermon, and the top left photo is actually the Dead Sea, or the Live Sea. So if you look at it, and I know all you see is water now, but if you look at the plain, like if you see it's all flat, that's what Lot saw. He saw flat and he saw lush. That's what Lot saw when he chose to go that way, because he had cattle and all of that land was flat, and it was between the two mountains. You had not mountains but hills. You have the hills that are on the left-hand side, on the Israel side, which is actually those caves, and that's actually the Qumran caves where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. And you have those you have those hills on the right-hand side, which is currently Jordan, previously the land of Moab and Ammon, and so on and so forth. Pick it back up in 14.
14?
14. I mean, wherever you picked up in 14.
15.
15.
Verse 15.
Yeah.
And he divided himself against them by night, he and his servants, and smote them, and pursued them unto Hobah, which is on the left hand of Damascus.
And so on the photo you saw Damascus, which is in Syria, which is further north. So what you see that they actually did was after they came through west, then they went north. And when Abraham found out, or Abram at this time, what he did was he pursued them north, and that's how he ended up overtaking them right above Damascus, which is Syria. Come on.
And he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot, and his goods, and the women also, and the people. And the king of Sodom went out to meet him, after his return from the slaughter of Kedar Laomer, and the kings that were with him at the vale of Shaveh, the same as the king's vale. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought forth bread and wine, and he was priest of Yah, the Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abraham of Yah Most High, maker of heaven and earth. And blessed be Yah the Most High, who hath delivered thine enemies into thy hand. And he gave him 1/10 of all. And the king of Sodom said unto Abram, Give me the persons and take the goods to thyself. And Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted up my hand unto Jehovah God Most High, maker of heaven and earth, that I will not take a thread nor a shoe latchet, nor aught that is thine, lest thou shouldest say, I have made Abram rich.
So, and again, this is one of the major reasons why the differences that you see with Abraham and how Abraham dealt with people. So you had the Melchizedek came down, and he was the high priest. And the Most High God, Abraham dealt with Melchizedek in the manner in which that he did. But then when it came to the king of Sodom, the king of Sodom was just like, well, he was happy to have everybody back. And he's like, well, you know what? Just take all of the stuff and just give me the people back. And Abraham was like, no. Abraham was like, no. Because my integrity comes into play here. And I don't want you to be able to go out and say that you did anything for me. I know, and when we look at things like that, cognitive dissonance, we always like free stuff. Free stuff isn't always what's important. Not sometimes, all the time, your integrity is more important than free stuff. Always. Because the second that you become known as one of those people who associate with sinners and wicked people, that's all they see. And no matter how much good you do, your reputation is already tainted because of the company that you keep.
Teach us.
So I want us to consider that. Abraham was well within his rights to take everything. But he didn't. Because his integrity was more important than all of that stuff. But what Abraham also realized, because Avron he was in the midst of like Abner and Mamre, they weren't like him. He knew that their integrity wasn't the same. So he said, you know what, give it to them.
Right.
They'll take it, help them out, not me. And it shows you, and that's why when I said we needed Avram then and we need Avram now, we're Avram. And we need to start to act like that. Because we understand we're in the midst of people and we need to mix and we need to mingle, but we need to be clear that we're not the same. We need to show that difference clearly. And Avram said he was confederate with Abner and Mamre, but you see clearly that they weren't the same. Avram was altogether different. What I'm telling you is when we out in the street, we need to be altogether different. Come on.
Save only that which the young men have eaten, and a portion of the men which went with me, Anir, Eshcol, and Mamre, let them take their portion. Chapter 15. After these things, the word of Yahweh came unto Avram in a vision, saying, Fear not, Avram, I am thy shield. Thy reward shall be exceeding great. And Avram said, O Yahweh God.
So hold on a second. So because that's the other thing. Avram, he's just kind of going on faith with certain things. God told him to do it, and so he went and did it. But God recognized that Avram needed certain reassurances too. So when Avram came back from from the fight, and the king of Sodom said, take the stuff. And Avron was like, I won't take not a thread nor a shoe lag. You can't give me nothing. Nothing. Right after that, God appeared to him and he said, I am your reward.
Right.
Showing him, I approve. I appreciate how you conduct and carry yourself. He said, I am your reward. I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great.
That's right.
Because sometimes you need that reassurance. Sometimes us as a people, we need that reassurance. He came to him, he said, I am your shield. Your reward shall be exceedingly great. Come on.
And Avram said, O Yehovah God, what wilt thou give me, seeing I go hence childless? And he that shall be possessor of my house is Eliezer of Damascus.
So now, hold on a second. So now, Eliezer of Damascus is his servant from Damascus, from Syria. Avram was all the way from Ur to Kasdim. How did he get a servant from Syria? Just something to think about. But just to show you, and this is why Avram was so important. God just blessed him.
Right.
Pharaoh, Abraham had stuff. Hear me. Avram had stuff. And then after he interacted with Pharaoh, he got more stuff and more stuff.
Right.
And God told him shield and reward and blessings and all those different things. And Avram's response was, yeah, I hear you, but I need a child. I need a seed.
Right. That's right.
Money isn't always important.
Teach us.
Money isn't the only thing that matters. Because you can have all the money in the world, just like Avram, and if you don't have seed, who that's going to go to? Some foreigner. And Avram was always focused, because what happened? God came to him in the beginning and he said, your seed is going to possess all these different things. He ain't had no seed yet. So he can't fulfill the promise that God probably, I'm just saying, I'm waiting. At the time, Avram was late 70s. Come on.
And Avram said, Behold, to me thou hast given no seed, and lo, one born in my house is to be mine heir. And behold, the word of Yehovah came unto him, saying, This man shall not be thine heir, but he that shall come forth out of thy own bowels shall be thine heir.
Come on.
And he brought him forth abroad and said, Look now toward heaven, and count the stars, if thou be able to count them. And he said unto him, So shall thy seed be. And he believed in Yehovah, and he counted it unto him for righteousness.
It wasn't just that one time.
Right.
A lot of times we look at that and we believe that we think that Avram believed that it wasn't that one time. It was because he believed from the beginning. Because at 75 years old, God told him go, and he left. Everything that he knew. Everything. So when it said, and Avram believed in him and it was counted to him as righteousness, it's because Avram was believing all along. And Avram followed everything that God said all along. Come on.
And he said unto him,
No, I'm sorry. Because I just wanted to touch on this before we go too far. When in verse 6, where it says, and he said unto him, actually, that's what you're reading now, right?
I'm at 7.
Yes, read that.
And he said unto him, I am Yehovah that brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. And he said, O Yehovah God, whereby shall I know that I shall inherit it?
Okay, so hold on right there. So this is the last slide that we're going to do, and then, I think it's a couple of slides. All right. So Ur of the Chaldees. So if you look at the map, it shows you where Ur of the Chaldees is, and it's right at what is now known as the Persian Gulf. And the reason that this is part of what they call a Fertile Crescent, where all civilizations had to develop around some body of water. Why? Because you needed to be able to plant, you needed water, you needed to be able to eat. So this civilization was no different. But I want to focus on this because a lot of times we see this term Mesopotamia. And Mesopotamia is a Greek term. So you don't hear much about the Greeks now, but the land region is called Mesopotamia. So I want to discuss this for a minute because the region of Mesopotamia actually includes a lot of different countries, a lot of different types of people. Babylonians who were Shemitic, and some Hamites in there. It had Assyrians, which were Shemitic, Elamites, which were Shemitic, the Persians and the Medes, which were Yaphetic, which were from Yaphet. Right. It had the Sumerians, which was Shemitic or Hamites, depending on the country and the time, and it had the Amorites, which were Hamites. But yet, when the Greeks came in, everybody in that region, they just determined as Mesopotamia. And so they lumped 3 different classes of people, all by one term, Mesopotamia. The reason that that's important is, I want you to go to the next slide, and I'm going to explain the slide. When you look up Sumer, right? When you look up Sumer, Sumer is the first civilization that they say. They say the Sumerian language is the first language, the first worldwide language, the first linguistic stem. Sumerian. And they actually, what they are saying is, when you research it, they're saying that most of the Bible stories came from, are replicas of Sumerian history. That's what they say. So now if you look at the photo that's on the bottom right, that's a photo of who they say the Sumerians were. Now, obviously, it's not. Now I see your faces, right? So just hear me out. This is who they say the Sumerians were. And if you look at them, the Sumerians, the depiction of the Sumerians don't look like everybody else that was in the regions. Because the Akkadians came after the Sumerians, and the Sumerians were actually further south in Babylon. The Akkadians were north in Babylon. And so what you see is the pictures of Babylon engraved in caves, and also Akkadians engraved in caves. So now look at the face. You see the hair is curly. You see that there's full beards and hair and all of those different things on the Akkadians and the Babylonians. But when you look at what they say is the Sumerians, they look like who? Caesar. If you Google pictures of Julius Caesar and the Greeks and the Romans at the time, that's that depiction, and that's where it came from. And the only reason I go into that is just to explain that when we talk about the manipulation and the mind control runs deep, it's actually a lot deeper than we actually consider. Right. And so when we take the time out to point these things out, is we want you to see it. So Sumerians, Babylonians, and Akkadians all were in the same territory. How 2 look like this and 1 look like this? Just something to consider. Come on.
Verse 9. And he said unto him, take me a heifer of 3 years old, and a she-goat of 3 years old, and a ram of 3 years old, and a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. And he took him all these, and divided them in the midst, and laid each half over against the other. But the birds divided he not. And the birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Avron drove them away. And it came to pass that when the sun was going down, a deep sleep fell upon Avron, and lo, a dread, even a great darkness fell upon him. He said unto Avron, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in the land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. And also that nation whom they shall serve will I judge, and afterward shall they come out with great substance. But thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace. Thou shalt be buried in a good old age. And in the 4th generation they shall come back hither, for the iniquity of the Amorite is not yet full. And it came to pass that when the sun went down, and there was thick darkness, behold, a smoking furnace, and a flaming torch that passed between these pieces. In that day Jehovah made a covenant with Abraham, saying, unto thy seed have I given this land from the river of Zaccar, from the river of Egypt unto the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenite, and the Kenizzite, and the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Rephaim, and the Amorite, and the Canaanite, and the Girgashite, and the Jebusite.
So I'm just going to touch on a couple of things, and this is actually the last slide. So based on the promise that God gave to Abraham in 18, he promised Abraham from the river in Egypt, which is the Nile River, to the river Euphrates. So if you notice, and that's what I have a picture of, what God promised Abraham is a lot bigger than that portion of Israel that they have on the map today.
Of course.
Because what God promised Abraham, every place the sole on your foot shall tread. Abraham, and if you notice the extreme most right corner is where? Ur of the Chaldees, because that's where he started. And he came all the way down and he was all in Egypt. Remember, we met him in Egypt. Right? We met him in Egypt with Pharaoh. So that whole section of Egypt from the Nile River west and that whole section from the Euphrates going west, that's what God actually promised Avron. It was before we go into the next couple of chapters, which, please forgive me, I'm going through it. I'm working as quick as I can. I touched on the Greeks and how they identify Mesopotamia and all of the people in the region the same way. That's not the only time that's something that the Greeks were actually famous for. Everybody from everybody from Africa, sub-Saharan Africa down, they also refer to as Ethiopia. All Ethiopian. Doesn't matter what nation or nationality you come from. When everybody not in the land of Judah, but in the land of Judea, which is different, everybody in the land of Judea, which included people from the tribe of Judah, people from the other 10 tribes, it included Samaritans, Sumerians, and also Edomites. All of those are included when they talk about Judeans. And so when you take the term Judean when you take the term Judean and you translate it into Greek, and then from that you start the linguistic stem to go down to the term Jew.
Right.
I'm just telling you that Jew isn't an accurate term because the term Jew is inclusive of a whole bunch of people that the term Israelite does not include.
That's right.
So I understand. We were always taught that the Jew is the how you translate Judah or Yehudi. It's not.
Never was.
Never was. 8 linguistic stems later, children of Judah being pulled from here and from over here, and then they were taken into France. And after a portion of them were taken into France, that's when the actual term Juif, Juif, or Jew actually started to come into play in the 1400s. Jew, Yehudi, 2 different people, 2 completely different things. Cognitive dissonance. I understand that sometimes puts your mind in conflict, but just listen to the information, and if you disagree, just research it.
That's it.
Come on.
Chapter 16, hallelujah.
Hallelujah.
Now Sarai, Avram's wife, bore him no children. And she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Avram, Behold, now Yehovah hath restrained me from bearing.
Mm-hmm.
Go and I pray thee unto my handmaid. It may be that I shall be builded up through her. Mm-hmm. And Avram hearkened to the voice of Sarai.
Now, God said, look to the rock from whence you were hewn, and the hole of the pit in which you were digged. Look to Abraham and look to Sarah.
Correct.
So now, Sarah knew what God had promised to Abraham because he told her, had to tell her. This is what the promise was. He knew he needed a seed. She knew that it was important for her husband to have a son. She knew that. And she knew she couldn't do it up until this point. And the selflessness of her made her say, take her. The selflessness of her. So I want to talk. I'm going to talk about polygamy for a minute, not to talk about polygamy in a sense, but polygamy is supposed to be a family-oriented institution. I understand that we came later because of how we were taught, and polygamy turned into whatever polygamy turned into. Polygamy is not and was never been you getting 7 girls pregnant and not taking care of any child. Polygamy was never that. Polygamy was a family-oriented institution that allowed everyone to have a spouse. You shared in things. You did things together. Guess what? Sometimes men may be a little bit more compartmentalized. Some men want a house with a one wife here and a house with a one wife here. And some men want a house with one wife here and one wife all the way across town. Because sometimes you need to decompress and a long drive to go from one to the other. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But it's supposed to be a family-oriented institution. And so we can't take what some savages did and now say we throwing that whole thing away, something that God has promoted. The act that she did was selfless because she knew up until this point she couldn't do it.
Teach us.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's okay. It's okay. Come on.
Verse 3. And Sarai, Avram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her handmaid, after Avram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to Avram, her husband, to be his wife.
And she took, like, it was a young lady too. Like, young lady, okay. Come on.
And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived.
Oh, before you go to that part. The other thing that I just want to mention is, if you look at this, this was Abraham and Sarah. Because Abraham and Sarah knew what the promise was. They just didn't know how it was going to happen. So this is them saying, I know that God promised this, and you're looking at your own mortality and saying, let me figure out a way to make this happen, but that wasn't God's plan. But kudos to them for trying. Because they were trying to effectuate what they know God promised.
Right.
Sometimes you do good, and sometimes it doesn't work. Things happen. That doesn't mean you stop doing good just because somebody else can't appreciate it.
Right.
That doesn't mean that. You don't change who you are because somebody else did you wrong.
Teach us.
Don't change who you are. That's not your ineptness. That's them. Don't let someone else's savagery and ineptness become your baggage. Come on.
And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes.
So she started this. Hagar started walking around. Hagar, do the dishes. You do the dishes. I'm carrying the holy seed.
Right.
Come on.
And Sarai said unto Avram, my wrong be upon thee.
So she ain't go through his. She ain't do none of that. She came to him. She came to him. Listen, this is what's happening. Come on.
My wrong be upon thee. I gave my handmaid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. Yehovah would judge between me and thee. But Avram said unto Sarai.
And she was hurt. Justifiably so, because she really did what she thought was right. And it didn't turn out well, but it wasn't Sarah's fault. It was Hagar's fault. And so she was upset with Abram. And this is Abram's response.
Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her that which is good in thine eyes. And Sarai dealt harshly with her, and she fled from her face.
People say Sarai went upside her head or whatever. Listen, there were some conversations.
Right.
Whatever happened, Sarah wasn't having it. Hagar said, it's just best for me to go. Come on.
And the angel of Yehovah found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's handmaid.
So I just find that very interesting. Because the angel of God came and said, Hagar, Sarai's handmaid.
Right.
Like, I think you lost focus on who you are.
Facts.
Because when you come into somebody's family, you can't come into family all big but you can't come into my family like that. They've been together for years.
You're too braggadocious.
Say that again, because I can't say it.
You're too braggadocious.
Come on. So listen, you can't come in people's family like that, because that also causes problems. So he put her in a place, respectfully, Hagar, Sarai's handmaid. It's who you are. Come on.
And he said, Hagar, Sarai's handmaid, whence camest thou? And whither goest thou? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai.
Mm-hmm.
And the angel of Yahweh said unto her, return to thy mistress and submit thyself under her hand.
Sometimes you got to humble yourself.
Uh-oh.
Sometimes you got to humble yourself. And that's what he told her. Sarai's handmaid, go humble yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I know she was upset. Go humble yourself. But I want to show you how good God is. Come on.
And the angel of Yahweh said unto her, I will greatly multiply thy seed, that it shall not be numbered
Made
for
her feel better.
multitude.
Come on.
And the angel of Yahweh said unto her, behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and thou shalt call his name Yishmael.
Why?
Because Yahweh have heard thy affliction.
What affliction? What affliction? Because she was going through what she was going through too. And so what I'm saying is, God not just the God of you, God is the God of everybody. So even though she was disrespectful in how she handled it, she was going through what she was going through, and God said, I heard that too. Call his name Yishmael, because I want you to remember, because you're down and you're hurting, and I want you to know that I heard you too. You talking about? People, when we walking around acting like God don't speak to women, God don't comfort women. Who are you talking about? He said, I heard your affliction. Call his name this. So if he heard her affliction from that interaction, you don't think God heard the affliction of women and pregnant women and raped women and hurt women and all of those different things, abused and battered women all over the world? You don't think he heard them too?
All right.
I'm just asking. God hear everybody. God is the God of everybody. You know, one of the things that we brought out of slavery, that as a man, God only listens to us. That's a slave master mentality, because that's the mentality that they put on the slaves. God don't listen to y'all. He don't hear y'all. Y'all oppressed. Y'all a slave. He only hears us. And we took that and we tried to perpetuate that as well. And it caused broken homes, broken families. Feminism wasn't a black people issue. Feminism was a European American issue.
Teach us.
That's what it was. European Americans were feminists because European women didn't like the way they was treated.
Right.
European women didn't get the right to vote until 1920. They couldn't own land either. European men oppressed everybody. Men, women, boys, everybody.
Wow.
Yep.
Everybody.
Yep.
And so what happened was feminism needed more strength, so they pulled our women into their fight when it was never our fight in the first place. Never our fight in the first place. God hear everybody. Come on.
Verse 12. And he shall be a wild ass of a man.
Yes, he is.
His hand shall be against every man,
Sure
and every
is.
man's hand against him. And he shall
Sure
grow
is.
in the face of all his brethren.
Everybody. They all dwell together in the same spot, wild, all those different things. And I'm going to tell you, don't let America fool you, right? Because America will tell you, the media will tell you. One of the things I appreciate about Trump is not many, but this is one, is at least he calls certain things like it is. And he started, we believed that Democrats were our friend,
No.
which I'm hoping you're seeing different now.
Okay.
And we believed that the media was our friend, which I'm hope you're seeing different now. Because I'm going to tell you, I've experienced it. They talk about Islam and Arabs, and the Arabs are the enemy of everybody. They're not the enemy of everybody. They're the enemy of the people that's trying to subvert the things that they're doing. Because I went and I met them. They gave me great falafels. They treated me great. I ain't had no issue.
None.
They make you think that they bombs and guns and all those different things. When I went and I met them, they looked just like me. And they treated me well. Don't let their fight be our fight. Because it's not. They always want to drag people in for support. And after they drag you in for support, after they finished with you, they will throw you away. Just like they did the healthcare workers and the teachers and the police and everybody who worked with recycled masks, and all of those different things that are now being fired because they don't need you anymore. Come on.
And she called the name of Jehoiada that spoke unto her, Thou art the God of seeing. For she said, Have I even here seen him with that seeth me?
Amen.
Wherefore the well was called Be'er Lachai Roi.
Amen.
Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bore Abram a son. And Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore Ishmael.
Amen.
And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram.
Amen. Come on.
Chapter 17.
Mm-hmm. Come on.
And when Avron was 90 years old and 9, Jehovah appeared to Avram and said unto him, I am Yah Almighty. Walk before me and be thou wholehearted.
Amen.
And I will make my covenant between me and thee and will multiply thee exceedingly. And Abraham fell on his face, and Yah talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with thee, and I shall be the father of a multitude of nations.
And all these promises that God is making, he showed him a seed, but then, and Abraham was happy, and Abraham was content, but God wasn't finished. Come on.
Neither shall thy name any more be called Avram, but thy name shall be Abraham. For the father of a multitude of nations have I made thee.
Amen.
And I will make thee exceeding fruitful, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. And I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee throughout their generations, for an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee.
And the only thing that I want to say is I can't express this as much as I can, because as much as I want to because of time. But I want you to understand who you are. You're not the people who they try to get you to depict you to be. You're not the people that stand on corners with tight pants trying to find a gun to stay there. That's not you. It said that kings is going to come out of him, kings and queens. And I just want y'all to understand that that's who y'all are.
Teacher.
Kings and queens. But guess what? Guess what? Kings and queens need to act like what? Kings and queens. Because Menashe was a king too, and when Menashe was acting up, God dragged him all the way back. Yeah. Dragged him with hooks in his arms. Why? Because he was a king and he wasn't acting like one.
Right.
So I'm just saying, we kings and queens, you need to act like it.
Yep.
We priests, you need to act like it.
Talk about it.
You need to act like it.
Talk about that.
Because they go hand in hand. Come on.
And I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee the land of thy sojournings, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God.
Amen.
And Yah said unto Abraham, And as far as thee, thou shalt keep my covenant, thou and thy seed after thee throughout their generations. This is my covenant, which ye shall keep between me and you and thy seed after thee. Every male among you shall be circumcised, and ye shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin. And it shall be a token of a covenant betwixt me and you. And he that is 8 days old shall be circumcised among you, every male throughout your generations. He that is born in thy house or bought with money, or any foreigner that is not of thy seed. He that is born in thy house and he that is bought with thy money, with thy money, must needs be circumcised. And my covenant shall be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. And the uncircumcised male who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that soul shall be cut off from his people. He hath broken my covenant.
So again, I'm just going to touch on circumcision for a minute. So you see how the importance that God speaks about circumcision as it relates to Abraham. So if you ain't right, you need to go get right.
Right.
Come on.
And Yah said unto Abraham, As for Sarai thy wife, thou shalt not call her name Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name.
Amen. And
I will bless her, and moreover, I will give thee a son of her. Yea, I will bless her, and she shall be a mother of nations. Kings of people shall be of her. Then Abraham fell upon his face, and laughed, and said in his heart, Shall a child be born unto him that is 100 years old? And shall Sarah that is 90 years old bear? And Abraham said unto Yah, Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee. Right. And Yah said, Nay, but Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son, and thou shalt call his name Yitzchak. And I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant for his seed after him.
So hold on. I just want to talk about patience for a minute, right? Because God came to Abraham and promised him something 25 years ago.
Right.
25 years ago that he delivered 25 years later.
Right.
Talk about patience. Yeah. And even in the midst of, Abraham still did everything that God told him to do. Every single time. Sarai, she had to deal with this issue with Ishmael for 13 years.
Right.
She had to deal with that, and you know she felt the way she felt because she told you maybe Hagar started to act right. She needed to deal with it for 13 years. And then God blessed them with everything that he promised them at that point 25 years later. It's just a lesson in patience.
Amen.
Come on.
And as for Yisrael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. 12 princes shall he beget, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant will I establish with Zaccar, whom Sarah shall be unto thee at this set time in the next year.
Clear separation. Come on.
And he left off talking with him, and Yah went up from Abraham. And Abraham took Ishmael his son, and all that were born in his house, and all that were bought with his money, every male among the men of Abraham's house, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskin in the selfsame day, as Yah had said unto him.
Same day. Same day. Soon as God finished talking, Abraham went to follow through with what God told him to do. That's why Abraham was so special. That's why God, out of all of the people, so at the time that Isaiah came about, you had Moses, you had Noah, you had David, you had Solomon, you had Joshua, you had everybody, and God still said, look to Abraham. Because it was something about Abraham that was different than the rest of them. That's not to say that he was better, but it was something about Abraham that was different than the rest of them. Finish it up.
And Avron was 90 years old and 9 when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. And Ishmael his son was 13 years old when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. In the selfsame day was Abraham circumcised, and Ishmael his son. And all the men of his house, those born in the house and those bought with money of a foreigner, were circumcised with him. Hallelujah.
All honors, praises, respect, acknowledgement, and thanks I offer unto the great King of the universe, to the God of our fathers, to the God of Abraham, the God of Yitzchak, and the God of Yaakov, thanking him for all things and thanking him for everything. I bid you in the tongue of our forefathers. Shabbat Shalom.